Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's ISE webinar, which is going to be produced by Tristram, who's our Chief Research Officer. My name's Tom, so I am the Membership Development Manager at the ISE. I'll be facilitating the webinar. So just kind of a few house rules. Obviously, Tristram will go through this year's development survey in a bit more detail. Please do put your questions in the questions box throughout the presentation, throughout the webinar, and then what we'll do is we'll do kind of a live chat with Tristram, and I will reproduce the questions so he can give the answers to the whole group. Any other issues throughout the webinar, obviously just please do put them in the message boxes. But for now, I will hand over to Tristram. All yours.
Okay. Can you hear me okay, Tom?
Yeah, all good, Tristram. You are good to go.
Very good. All right, let's make a start then. Okay, so I'm going to be talking today about the Student Development Survey. So for those that are new to this, the ISE produces a number of pieces of research through the year, but there are two real sort of flagships that we produce. The first one's our recruitment survey, which comes out over the summer or at the end of the summer. And then there's the development survey. And the difference between those really is that the recruitment survey focuses on how do employers actually find talent, find graduates and apprentices to work in their businesses. And the development survey focuses on what do they do with them once they've found them. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. And so we've got a bit of data to share. But just before we get onto that, I just wanted to tell you about a few updates about things that are going on in the ISE, on the website particularly. So I'm just showing you here our knowledge section, which is where we keep a lot of our research and intelligence that the ISE has available to offer to people. And so we've produced some new sections to that. And so we've got a research section, which I'll be talking about a bit more in a second, so a section on policy, and then a section on practice. And that looks at different key themes where the ISE works and ISE employers are interested in. And it talks a bit about how what kind of intelligence we've got about how those things are working. And that's a section that's very much in development, but particularly if you look at the apprenticeships and school leavers bit, then we've done quite a lot of work to try and really synthesize sort of best practice, I suppose. Moving on, I've then managed now to put pretty much all of the publications that the ISE has produced back to 2003 onto the website. So if you're interested in research and data, you can see that we've produced a huge amount of stuff. So here's just some examples from the last couple of years. There's lots more to come. In the long run, I will be hoping to go back even further than 2003 and look at what else we've got. And the other thing is that we've got some dashboards. So if you want to actually get in and kind of query the data yourself, we've got some dashboards. So here's one on salary, and you can look at what's the different salary for different sectors and different business sizes and that kind of thing. So if you're interested in getting a bit more involved, then absolutely go in and have a look. And these are all in the research section under that knowledge tab on our website. So just before we start, I'll just remind you that if you like this, then you're going to love our up and coming making use of labour market data to support graduate careers and employability workshop. So we're organising a one-day workshop that's particularly aimed at higher education careers and employability staff. And it's really about looking at how do you analyse and use labour market data to support students in their career learning. And so we'll be going through some of the details of some of the ISE data, but also going much wider, looking at the labour force survey, the Delhi surveys, and various other kinds of sources of labour market data that you can use when you're working with graduates. Now, if you're an employer, got some good news that we'll hopefully be organising a similar workshop aimed more at employers. That'll probably be in the autumn, so watch this space for that. So now to move on to the development survey. So I think one of the things that interests me about the development survey is that really it's where careers are made. If you think about the kind of first job you had, it's really one of the places where you really started to think about what it is you want to do, how you want your life to go. You start to figure out what you were good at and what you were bad at. And from an employer's point of view, the first job is one of the places where you figure out whether people are useful to you and what their career with you might be. But it's also a place where you get an awful lot of work done. I mean, you obviously need people to do a very wide range of tasks, and there are a whole set of things that you want to be able to give to new entrants just to kind of get your business working effectively. So I think there's two really interesting issues here. The first is that employers have a really strong interest in making sure that young people make a successful transition into their businesses and become productive very quickly. And individuals have a really strong reason to want to work really hard and make the most of it and get a good opportunity. So the development survey puts us right in the middle of some of those interesting concerns, because it asks employers, how are you actually dealing with the new entry-level workers that you're bringing into your business? So we do this in the way we do a lot of our surveys. So we go out to all of our employers and we ask them a lot of questions, and we then kind of analyze the data. So this time we had 156 responses. So that's about half, slightly over half of our membership, our eligible membership. And so it gives you a pretty good idea of what the kind of employer who is a member of the ISE is thinking and doing in relation to their student development practice. So the first thing is that we can see, we ask them, well, how many people did you recruit in different years, and how many of them are currently being developed? And we can see that actually the number of hires involved in this has been going up pretty steadily over the last few years. And the other thing that's been happening is there's been a sort of evening out about the amount of graduates as opposed to apprentices. And so some people asked me, and I wrote an article for the Luminate blog the other day where we said, is the day of the graduate over? Are employers starting to give up on graduates? And what I can say is absolutely not. That's not what's happening at all. In fact, graduate numbers have been going up. The number of graduates that employers have been recruiting every year in the ISE has been going up, but so has the apprenticeships, and the apprenticeships have been going up a bit faster. And one of the interesting stats that we have here is that over half, 58% of firms, are now developing apprentices to do work that was previously done by graduates. So there are some challenges for graduates, and it's important for those people who are in university career services to think about how they address that. Obviously for employers to think about, okay, what's the right balance of different kind of streams of talent? So if we then think about how employers organise their development teams, on average they spend about £2 million a year on development costs, and that's about £4,000 per hire, £3,850 per hire, and the average firm would have about 11 members of staff who are involved in development in some way. If we then look at how that staff time is spent, it's divided between the different types of hire and broadly kind of fits with the amount of people that they're hiring. But there's also another category that we ask people about here, which is, okay, what about wider organisational development? And employers are actually doing quite a bit of that. So not just spending time training and developing, mentoring graduates and so on, but also making sure that their businesses are suitable and effective. So that might include doing things like training managers to more effectively manage graduates. If we then look at the budget, we get a similar kind of story, although probably graduates are still getting the lion's share of the money that's spent in the development space. Most employers are using external contractors as part of this, and they're using them for kind of a wide range of things, and that includes things like running training programs, delivering and accrediting qualifications, delivering apprenticeship programs, mentoring, getting involved in event management, and then kind of wider consultation on their programs. So although there's a lot of resource within firms which is devoted to developing graduates and other types of hires, there's also a lot of people are bringing in a lot of external contractors as well. So one of the things that we're interested in is, what about the apprenticeship levy? So the apprenticeship levy is a really important issue because it's sort of driving the way that employers are spending money on development. And what we know is that sort of nationally, most employers are struggling to spend all the apprenticeship money that they're expected to spend. ISE members are much better at that. So I think that really speaks to the fact that the kind of firm that is involved in the ISE, large-scale firms with sort of traditions in graduate recruitment tend to be better at doing developing their staff. Now that varies a bit by sector, so I've put our lowest and our highest sector. So we moved from the sort of retail sector, which is somewhere around the national average for all firms here, of around about 15%. And then we've got the built environment, where they're spending about 45% of their apprenticeship levy. And they're really kind of thought about how to do that, and have got a good idea and are spending a lot of the money. Now this matters for graduates as well, and I'll show you why in a second. So what are firms spending their apprenticeship levy on? Well, good news, certainly from the point of view of the government, is that lots of them are spending that money on entry-level hires, which is kind of what the government was originally thinking people would spend it on. Some being spent on experienced hires, not very much, and a proportion spent on existing staff. And in general, it looks like the ISE employers are spending a lot more on entry-level staff than the sort of typical employer across the country. If we then asked, and this is why it's important to recognise that graduates and apprentices are not just entirely separate categories, is about a third of employers are spending their apprenticeship levy to create programs that are essentially their graduate program. So that means you finish your degree and you start on a graduate program, and while you're doing that, you're also studying an apprenticeship. And obviously that's very attractive for employers because it allows them to use the apprenticeship levy to pay for things that they've been doing in other ways. Now, about a third of other employers are saying, well, actually, no, we're not doing that yet, but we're certainly thinking about it. And then a third, again, are saying, no, we're not doing that yet. So we asked employers what they thought they would like to change about the apprenticeship levy system. So about 83% would like increased flexibility in the way this money can be spent and it can be organised. 59% wanted faster development of standards, apprenticeship standards, which is the kind of way the apprenticeships are organised. So that's in order to get the kind of standards, that the kind of employers that they need. 50% would like to change the requirement to have to provide 20% off the job training, and 30% would like it to get cheaper, which is not perhaps so surprising. And then if we look at what apprenticeships they're recruiting, again, we can see that they're recruiting across all levels, all different types of apprenticeships. But really importantly, they're recruiting degree apprenticeships and master's degree apprenticeships. Now that's, again, really important because it tells us that while some of those degree apprenticeships are replacing graduate recruitment, others are supplementing it. So people are finishing their degree and then they're going on to a level 6 or a level 7 apprenticeship. Most employers are working with multiple apprenticeship providers. Relatively few are actually delivering apprenticeship programs themselves within the firm. And about half of those who are using level 6 apprenticeships, and almost 3/4 of those who are using level 7 apprenticeships are using them as part of their graduate development programs. So the average graduate program is 24 months. It's 2 years. That's the typical way that people organise it. There's a bunch of other lengths and forms of organisation that exist, but the overwhelming majority of graduate programs are about 24 months. And we then say, well, how do you get graduates to spend their time while they're on a program? And what they said was, well, about 3/4 of their time is spent actually doing the job that they're employed to do. And then sort of 13%, 10% or so is spent in formal training. About half that are much in self-study time. And then they spend about 9% being mentored. So this is kind of how the graduates' time is typically spent. And that's interesting if you think about the apprenticeships, where employers are kind of unhappy about the way that they're having to spend 20% off the job. But in fact, the graduates often are spending more than that, in fact. So generally, employers are recruiting onto specialist programs. Most are recruiting onto specialist programs. But what I mean by that is that you might recruit someone into your accounting function, or you might recruit someone into your HR or IT function. But around about half of employers are also recruiting onto general programs, so that's often associated with a rotation, so they give graduates lots of opportunities to try different things out. And then 18% are recruiting graduates direct to desk. And as you can see, those numbers don't add up to 100. So many employers are doing more than one of those things. They've got various different programs. On average, they're offering graduates about 21 days of training a year. We then think about, well, what skills do they think graduates have and don't have, and how does that compare to other skills? What we can see is that there are various things that employers have got concerns about. So resilience, the ability to manage up, so to manage your line manager, the capability to lead, having good commercial awareness, the capacity to deal with conflict. These are all areas that employers have got some concerns about in terms of the people they're recruiting. But really interesting to look at how graduates outperform apprentices. So one of the things that they were very much better at was dressing appropriately. So this is, it's kind of slightly amusing, but it's also, I think, speaks to something that is important for you to think about, is that when you're recruiting a graduate, you're probably getting someone who's a bit more polished, a bit more mature, has a bit more what's sometimes described as cultural capital, so awareness of the rules and the kind of mores of society. Apprentice a bit rawer, and so then there's a need to do something about that. But kind of more substantively, graduates are outperforming apprentices on things like presentation skills, data analysis, IT skills, interpersonal skills, writing skills, and problem-solving skills. So, and this is not surprising because graduates, certainly employers are paying graduates a lot more. They're coming with greater qualifications and so on. But it's also important to note here that there are a lot of areas in this list where graduates are not outperforming apprentices, or where apprentices are even outperforming graduates a little bit in some areas. So that's it. I think that's important to recognise that there are different skills and there are different things that you're going to need, and that's both should determine how you manage your recruitment if you're making decisions about recruitment, but it also should help you make decisions about how you develop these different groups, perhaps somewhat differently. So employers were generally really positive about students who had some kind of work experience, so been on a placement or internship. They thought they had better skills, and they weren't so interested in those students who had come with more qualifications, so had a postgraduate degree. And when we first published this research, we had quite a bit of a debate about this, because if you look at the statistics, it's certain that postgraduate degrees, people who have postgraduate degrees definitely earn more. But our employers are saying, well, that's not because they're specifically looking for them. And there's a lot of other explanations that we might look at as to why postgraduates earn more. Potentially, for example, that many postgraduates start their degrees mid-career rather than at the beginning of their career. So there's lots to look into there, but broadly, beyond the degree, most employers are feeling that students who have work experience, great, additional qualifications, they're not so worried. And so then what are they training them in? Well, many of the things that they said they were weak in, of course, they're training them in, but we've also got areas like presentation skills, commercial awareness, job-specific technical skills, which is very understandable why employers will be training graduates in that, interpersonal skills, self-awareness, and so on. Again, we look at the difference between apprentices and graduates. What we can see is that this issue of how to dress and also numeracy come in as things that people are more likely to train apprentices in than graduates. And then areas like problem solving, time management, IT and digital skills, staying positive. These are all areas where apprentices need a bit more training or are getting a bit more training than graduates. The only area really where graduates were getting a little bit more training than apprentices was in the area of leadership. And that's interesting. It wasn't a very strong difference, but it is worth mentioning, I think, because it probably says something about how employers still see graduates. If we then look at the approaches to training, these were the different kinds of ways that employers were training their staff. So they were using classroom learning, mentoring, online learning, peer support, rotations, experiential learning, lots of pretty tried and tested type of techniques here. We then said, well, which ones of these are the best? Which are the most impactful? And they said, well, actually, classroom learning, we really like that. That's very impactful. Mentoring, rotations, we think these are all good. One of the biggest discrepancies was although almost everyone is using online learning, only about a quarter of employers said that that was a particularly effective technique, and that seems worthy of comment, really. We then said, well, how many people finish these programs? And actually there was really positive feedback. Generally, graduates who are recruited and apprentices who are recruited onto programs are generally finishing them. 90% of them do it, and if they don't finish them, they're leaving by choice. And there's only a very small percentage who are being kind of managed out during the program because they're not up to scratch or for performance issues. We then looked a bit further on. So if we say that these sort of completion rates take us 2 years on average into a graduate's life or an apprentice's life, let's say what happens at 3 years after they've been hired? Well, apprentices are a lot more likely to still be with an employer 3 years after, but all of our different categories of staff, so graduates, apprentices and school leavers, are all pretty likely to still be there. So the overwhelming majority of them are still employed by the same person 3 years after they start. When we look at a bit longer time scale, when we look at 5 years, we can see that we've got a bit of a difference emerging. So although still the overwhelming majority of apprentices and school leavers are still in place, only 60% of graduates are still in place after 5 years. So they seem to be a little bit more mobile between jobs. So I've looked a bit at what explains the patterns in retention, what's going to help employers to keep people. Longer programs, longer graduate programs seem to help. But actually the demographics also seem to play a role here. So there seem to be issues with retaining women, Black and ethnic minority hires, and then mental health issues, unsurprisingly, also play a role here. So why do people leave an employer who they've probably worked really hard to get that job with? What allows them to leave, or what encourages them to leave? Well, generally all the reasons that people gave were essentially about career change, about looking for better opportunities elsewhere, or about feeling that the opportunities offered in the company were not good enough. So these ideas around career and progression are really important in terms of retention. There were some people, there was less interest in pay. It was not generally that people didn't feel they were getting enough money. It was more that they were not able to find the kind of career routes that they wanted. Also, performance issues do play a role. Job and company wasn't what they expected. There are various reasons, but I think that issue around career is probably the most important. So if we kind of conclude here, really, ISE members, I think we can say, are investing pretty heavily in the development of their hires. Apprenticeships are increasingly rivaling graduates as a talent route, but there are some important differences between the skills and training in these two groups that probably we'll see more of as the kind of apprenticeship route continues to develop over the next few years. The programs are really pretty successful. They have a high success rate, and they also support the retention of entry-level hires. And if you think, even with graduates who are only having 60% retention rates after 5 years, that still means that most of the people who you recruit in any 1 year are going to be there still in 5 years, which I don't think is kind of too surprising. But there are, I think, some important questions about how to best organise these programs so that they work for all participants, and that's some things that have been raised. So I'll just finish by kind of reminding people that we've got this course running at the beginning of July on making effective use of labour market data. I'll also point out that we're now offering a consultancy service. So if you want to dig into this data a bit further and you would like us to have a look at a particular issue that you're interested in, then we're absolutely there to help. And we give all ISE members a half day of free consultancy and then a reduced rate after that. So this is me. I'm Tristram. I'm the Chief Research Officer at the ISE. There's various ways to contact me there, but the development survey that I've been talking about is now available on the ISE website. The recording that we've done here will also be available along with the slides, and that will be put on the ISE website by the middle of next week. And then we've also recently launched a YouTube channel. So there's lots happening in the world of the ISE at the moment, lots of exciting new ways to interact with us and to get access to useful content. So I'm going to pause there and see if anyone has got any questions that they would like to ask about the development survey.
Don't seem to have any questions just at the moment. We'll let maybe some people type away if they need to. So we'll give it a minute or so if anyone has any questions for Tristram. And don't forget, obviously, today's webinar was obviously based on the development survey, but obviously we still have some time. So if there's anything slightly related to that or anything ISE related, obviously myself and Tristram will be happy to answer any questions. In the meantime as well, just to remind you that the webinar will be uploaded onto the ISE website at the end of next week. You'll be able to kind of listen back, and also the slides from today will be made available as well.
Okay, so if we've not got any questions, I'm guessing we'll probably finish. So thank you for coming, and thank you for listening to this webinar. I hope some of it's been useful to you, and we hope to see you soon on one of the many channels that the ISE is now broadcasting to you on.
Perfect. Thanks, Tristram, and thanks everyone else.